because it's a fundamental part of what they call their Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Charter of Rights and Freedoms, think Bill of Rights. Bill of Rights, think Charter of Rights and Freedoms. It turns out embedded in that, you probably can't tell with a small print here, is this right to organize and right to be represented on the job. So you can imagine the kind of arguments I've made about majority unionism. You could very quickly make demands at the point you have traction. So starting this summer in Toronto, we're doing a project that I'm leading up there to try to see if we can put together the same kind of organization among informal workers, particularly domestics, and we're looking at office workers and some others. You never know what will move. And our big private sector partner, and unfortunately I just saw this guy leave who had been with steelworkers, is actually the steelworkers, who are one of the largest, if not the largest, private sector workers union in Canada. The caution there is that we actually have had the steelworkers in Canada agree to this project several times over the last 3 or 4 years. Every year as they come to their summer board meeting and get ready to fund the project, they'll lose a unit. 10,000 workers will go down here in a steel mill in Hamilton, or they'll lose this or that, and then they don't have the money. And that's part of the problem, the crisis I think we're facing among institutional labor is that I'm not sure how many unions have the resources, even if they want to try a different model, to actually have the political will or the financial capital to try to do something even when they know, just like you know, just like I know, what they're doing doesn't work. So in the challenge of looking at this topic of opportunities and boundaries of community and labor organizing, I thought I would finish by looking at some things I've been thinking about over the last couple of years since I left Acorn, which seem to be almost universal truths to me that, I've learned about organizing. And one is this thing, it turns out nobody believes in institutions anymore. They don't believe in government, they don't believe in corporations, they don't believe in unions, they don't believe in Congress, they don't believe in courts, they don't even believe in the church. Institutions just aren't doing well. But luckily, for those of you who are interested in organizing, people still do believe in their neighbors and themselves and their capacity to do something with people who they know and trust. And that turns out to be a huge strength for people who believe in community organizing. The other thing that I've thought about a lot for all of the argument I make that you need to go upscale and think bigger and act bigger, real organizational power in this world, this would be the equivalent of Alexander the Great going all the way to India and conquering the existing world as we know it. Any organization, any community and labor organization can figure out a real way to solve these 3 issues has no limit to the power. One is loose dogs. Others bad service conditions. And crummy trash pickup. Now those 3 things, turns out anywhere you organize in the world, I don't know what methodology you use, loose dogs, bad drainage, lack of water, bad sewer, and crummy trash pickup, turns out to be the unifier for everybody. So if we get some good organizers sort of thinking about having to deal with that, I know it's not the sexiest issue in the world, but there's real power there. Institutions don't listen at all. I admire people passing around a petition. It turns out they only respond to action. Probably we all knew that, but you're reminded every day. The other thing is speaking truth to power. It's a big slogan when I started organizing in the late 60s. It doesn't work so well. It doesn't seem to work so well. And you can look at the difference. How many organizations, including great community organizations, great networks of community organizations, many of them I've worked with closely, raise the issue of banks and travesty of foreclosures, and all of a sudden it's taking over city parks. It's like Occupy Wall Street puts that in another dimension. So it turns out that you really do have to do something more than speak truth to power. The other thing, now I'm going on the better news side, is that it wasn't true in settling the West that rain follows the plow. Most of you probably never lived in the West, so this has no meaning to you. But it turns out the West is not like here in Ohio, it's very dry. So when they were settling in the West, People like Horace Greeley would say, rain follows the plow. If you just move out here and break ground, it'll be a new world. So that turns out not to be true in the real world, but it turns out in organizing it really is true. Resources will always follow an organizing program that you force into action. On the other hand, if you wait for somebody to give you the money, you're still Social Security. That's your best hope. It's not going to be successful organizing. If you want to take the risk, no one else will. One of the best examples I think I have, one of the proudest moments of my time with Acorn was our national office was in New Orleans. And so 2005, we had, 50 people in that building. Everything we do is simple as in New Orleans. You have this thing, Katrina comes in. Everything's gone. New Orleans Acorn had 6,000 members, dues-paying members. If you looked at a GPS map, which Cornell and some of our partners did for us later, there wasn't a block in places like the Ninth Ward that didn't have a dues-paying Acorn member. But it was a membership-based organization, so there was some power they had in terms of trying to contact people so that they could help rebuild. So in fighting to rebuild, they gutted with thousands of volunteers and millions of dollars, 5,000 houses, more than anybody else did at that time. And I won't go into the gutting program. It turns out the most expensive program you can ever run is a volunteer program. And that's all I'm going to say. You know what I'm talking about. But what did I know about volunteer programs? I was a community organizer, and they didn't single-handedly, but what this book tells a story of is how they went from a period where some of their largest areas had giant X's that were meant to never allow people to be able to go back to their homes. The lower Ninth Ward was 6 months later with National Guard, keeping people from even going in to see lost possessions. And the plan from the city and the business community was categorically funded and articulated by the Urban Land Institute not to allow people to go into these areas. Big X's in the Times-Picayune. And this book ends at the point where the single largest sum of money is dedicated to rebuilding New Orleans East and the Ninth Ward. If you're going to take a risk, if you're going to do this work, if you're going to try to make change, the chances of failing are almost 100%. So if you're going to do this work, and it's hard, and it turns out sweaty work, fall big. Try big. Don't try small. I mean, you're going to try it, and this is, you have to be, and this is one of the secrets that if you said, well, wait, you've had some success in this business. Well, it turns out I'm uneducable. This is what I've known how to do since I was 20 years old. This is the only work I know, so I better learn how to do it. And secondly, I'm not afraid to fail. And so what are they going to do if I fail? But we have a responsibility to win. So it turns out if we're persistent, take big risks, we win more often than we lose. On my gravestone, it'll say, one thing I did as an organizer was get people to pay dues. If you're not funded by your base, you can't survive an organization. And this lesson is repeated over and over again. In fact, arguably, you probably shouldn't survive if you aren't funded by your base. Part of how Acorn ended up going out of business in the end of 2010 was that when it was under crisis, this is obviously a very tragic thing I've watched from afar, it didn't hunker down and go to its base. It somehow believed it could appeal to what it felt were its friends. Unions, churches, institutions, foundations. And that doesn't work. And Planned Parenthood just showed us that. If you're able under attack to go to your base, you have a chance of surviving. If you can't go to your base and pick yourself up and fight, then you don't have much of a chance of surviving. Painful lesson. Members have to pay for services. One of the big insight I had after a year of being an organizer for welfare rights and running their Massachusetts operation, which was the largest they had, we had 4,000 members. Membership dues and welfare rights, $1 a year. When I won a campaign in Springfield, I was literally would force the welfare department to hand out checks for household supplies and vouchers for furniture. I'd be giving checks out to welfare recipient families, AFTC mothers with children, that were thousands of dollars. Because we won these special needs benefits that meant you got 4 chairs for every table, you got 2 sheets for every bed. And I don't know if they spent any of that money everybody, but that wasn't really my issue. But I could have collected God knows what in dues from those families. Instead, $1 was the due system. So the insight I took to Arkansas, which didn't have any money, was maybe we should do differently. And somehow we lost that in Acorn. The year I left, we were doing 50,000 tax returns. So we could be at the ITC, running VITA sites and this, that, and the other. We were doing even more than that in terms of housing counseling, helping people with housing. So direct benefits, adding up to huge cash money, probably 125,000 families a year for free. And if I had had the good judgment, which I didn't have, to not have those things funded by donors, but instead have them funded by the members, Acorn would have been able to weather that problem, combining its dues from its members and support from that base to be able to get by. So I'm pretty clear, I pay for services. If there's a question later on about Italy, I'll tell you how it's working out now. All donations and all outside support's temporary and conditional. So in Acorn International, I had to do some crazy things. Less than 6 months ago, we bought Acorn Global Enterprises, the only 100% fair trade coffee house in New Orleans. Actually, it's the voted by people in New Orleans, the #1 coffee house in all New Orleans. That's a picture of the new counter and our new menu board and our good looking food. It's called Fair Grinds Coffee House. And you know what? This is like, since I've already told you the welfare rights story, those of you who are real historians. So the symbol for welfare rights was a link in a chain. So it turns out if you own a business, you can do any kind of crazy thing you want. And so there's the link, linking our country together with the countries that supply our fair trade. And obviously the action, passion, intensity is the lightning bolts, I guess that's steam or whatever. But you can follow it pretty easily. The customers really don't care. Oh, yeah, okay. But from the first day, we immediately funded all the organizing operations in San Pedro Sula and Tegucigalpa, Honduras, where we work, and Lima, Peru, and our Mexico City office. And we can keep this going on in similar projects. What we're trying to do, because dues isn't quite enough in the mega slums to fund all of our operations, see if we can balance both of those kinds of activities to be more self-sufficient. As I said, the biggest barrier turns out to be you've got to ask. You ask for dues, people pay. Don't ask, they never pay. And if you're willing to ask, I really believe there are no boundaries for what you can do. There's a mixed crowd here, and I didn't know if we're going to have mostly students or whatever, but there's a piece of advice I always give students. I don't get to talk to students, and probably you'll find out why in about 2 seconds. But here's one thing I think for students as an organizer. If you're going to go to school, and obviously if you're in school, you obviously believe in it, you need to demand that as part of what you get out of school, you learn to support yourself, and you learn to finance your dreams. There's nothing, I think, more tragic than having people come out who have the spirit and passion and intensity, who talk to me who want to be organizers, and they're getting out of school or they're young, and they just don't know how to put together the resources, and they don't realize that if they jumped in and had some skills in that area, they could probably build something. So, if I were you, that's what I would demand. So, good luck, be strong, and thank you for being with me to talk about this. And I don't know who's going to moderate questions, but I appreciate your patience.